What you are about to hear is a story that has never been told in full. A story about two women who entered the same family through very different doors, who have never been in the same room without an audience, who have circled each other for years with a careful, deliberate distance that both of them have maintained with extraordinary discipline. And what happened last week when that distance finally collapsed? Hello, friends. My name is James, and you are watching Royal Daily Report, your #1 source for the most exclusive and most shocking royal stories on the internet. If you are new here, hit that subscribe button right now, because tonight we are telling a story that nobody else has the full picture on. The story of Meghan Markle and Camilla, and what passed between them when they finally found themselves alone. And if you have been with us from the beginning, you already know. We never hold back. We never pull back. Let us get into it. And before we go one single word further, if you are not subscribed to Royal Daily Report, hit that button right now. Turn on those notifications, because this story is one of the most extraordinary things we have ever covered on this channel, and the follow-up is coming very soon. Subscribe now. Let us get into it. To understand what happened last week, you have to understand the history between these two women, because it is longer and more complicated and more layered than almost any coverage of it has ever fully acknowledged. Camilla Parker Bowles entered the Windsor world long before Meghan Markle was born. She was part of Charles's life in ways that the public has spent decades trying to understand and categorize and judge. She survived the Diana years. She survived the public hatred that followed Diana's death, when her name was spoken with a coldness that most people in public life never experience, and that she absorbed without visible collapse. She waited. She was patient in a way that history has rarely been patient about acknowledging. And she eventually became queen, not through anything dramatic, through time, through persistence, through the particular endurance of someone who decided a very long time ago that they were not going to disappear. Meghan understands that story better than most people realize, because Meghan's own story, the woman who entered this family from the outside, who was never fully accepted by the institution, who survived public hostility in ways that cost her enormously, and who has persisted in building her own version of power and identity outside the palace walls, has structural similarities to Camilla's story that neither woman would probably be entirely comfortable acknowledging out loud. Subscribe to Royal Daily Report right now, because what our source describes as the accumulated tension between these two women, and the specific moment that changed everything about how they see each other, is coming right now. Subscribe now. Hit that button. Turn on those notifications. Subscribe now. Harry wrote about Camilla in Spare. Our source does not need to remind anyone of the specific language, the word dangerous, the accusations about leaking to the press, the portrait of a woman who Harry believed was actively working against him in service of rehabilitating her own public image, at whatever cost to the people around her. Those words landed in a specific way inside the palace, and they landed in a specific way on Camilla personally. Our source, who has connections close to Camilla's world, says that Camilla's response to those passages in Spare was not what most people assumed. It was not the cold fury of someone determined to punish the person who wrote them. It was something more complicated, something that people around Camilla described as a specific kind of recognition, the recognition of someone who has been written about in damaging ways before, who has had her character and her motives defined by other people's accounts of her in ways she had no power to contest publicly, who has spent decades being the villain in narratives that were not fully hers to correct. Camilla recognized the shape of what Harry had done to her in spare, not because it was accurate, but because she understood the mechanism, the way a person in pain uses another person as the explanation for that pain, the way someone who cannot fully access the real source of their anger finds a target that is close enough and connected enough to carry it. She had been that target before, in considerably more public and considerably more damaging ways than anything Harry wrote about her. And our source says she did not react to spare with the institutional coldness that the palace's managed silence suggested. She reacted with the complicated empathy of someone who understood what it felt like to need someone to blame. Meghan had her own relationship with the idea of Camilla, not with Camilla the person, with Camilla the symbol. Camilla had entered the family through love and stayed through endurance, had been publicly despised, and had refused to let that define her future, had eventually been accepted not because the public changed its view entirely, but because she made her position so solid that the view became irrelevant. Meghan has spent 6 years trying to do something structurally similar outside the palace walls, building something solid enough that the hostility becomes irrelevant, finding the ground underneath the noise, creating the version of the story that can survive the other versions being told about her. Our source says Meghan had thought about Camilla in those terms before, had seen the parallel in private ways she had never expressed publicly, had recognized that the woman Harry called dangerous in his memoir was also in some ways the woman who had shown that it was possible to be publicly despised and still build a life that was genuinely your own. The meeting happened during the Highgrove visit, not planned, not arranged, not part of any official agenda for the day. It happened in the way that genuinely significant things sometimes happen, in a corridor, a moment between other moments. Harry was with Charles in another part of the house. The children were with staff. Meghan was moving between rooms and Camilla was there, just there. And for the first time in the entire history of their relationship, these two women were in a space without anyone managing the interaction, without Harry present, without Charles present, without palace officials or advisors, or the institutional machinery that has always been the third presence in every room these two women have ever shared. Our source was not in that corridor, but they have spoken to someone who was close enough to be aware of what was happening, and who has shared what they witnessed with the particular care of someone who understood that what they were describing was significant. Camilla spoke first. She said something that our source describes as completely unexpected, given the history between them. She did not offer the diplomatic warmth of a managed royal encounter. She did not perform the gracious hostess routine that official occasions require. She said something direct, the kind of direct that only happens when two people are alone, and both of them know the audience has left the room. Camilla, I want to say something to you, not as the Queen, not as Charles's wife, just as a woman who has been in a position that has some similarities to yours. And I want to say it now, because I do not know when we will have another moment like this, and I think it matters that you hear it from me directly. Meghan was apparently very still. Our source says the person who witnessed this described Meghan as completely alert, not guarded, alert. The way she is when something real is happening and she wants to receive it accurately. Camilla, I read what Harry wrote about me. I did not respond publicly. I was advised not to, and I agreed not to, and I have kept to that. But I want you to know that I understand why he wrote it. Not because it was accurate. It was not accurate. but because I understand what it is to be in pain and to need someone to carry the weight of that pain for you. I was that person for Harry, and I have lived long enough and been in enough complicated situations to understand that being that person for someone is not always a reflection of what you actually did. Sometimes it is simply a reflection of what they needed. Meghan, I know he wrote things about you that hurt you. Camilla, he wrote things about me that were untrue. That is different from hurt. I have been hurt by things that were true. This was something else. Subscribe to Royal Daily Report right now, because what Meghan said in response, the thing our source says nobody in that palace anticipated Meghan Markle would ever say to Camilla, is the moment this story became something that nobody who was close to it will ever forget. Subscribe. Hit that button. Turn on those notifications. Subscribe now. Meghan, I owe you something. I have thought about whether to say this for a long time, and I have decided that not saying it is worse than the discomfort of saying it. What Harry wrote, the specific things he wrote about you, I did not encourage it. I want to be clear about that, because I know there are people who believe that I was the architect of everything in that book that caused damage. I was not. Harry's relationship with you and his feelings about you are his, and they are complicated in ways that are about his relationship with his father, and his relationship with his mother, and his relationship with the institution, and they have never primarily been about me. But I was in that house when the book was being written, and there were moments when I could have said, not that, not her specifically, not in those words, and I did not always say that, and that is something I carry. Camilla was apparently quiet for a moment. Our source says the person who witnessed this exchange was close enough to see both women's faces, and they described Camilla's expression in that moment as something they had never seen on her before. Not the composed public face, not the managed warmth of official occasions, something underneath both of those things. Something that looked like being genuinely reached by something genuinely unexpected. Camilla, why are you telling me this? Meghan, because I think you deserved better than what happened, and because I think the story between us has been told in ways that serve other people's narratives and not what is actually true between us, which is that we have barely spoken. We have barely been in the same room. We have never had a real conversation, and yet we have been positioned as adversaries in a story that neither of us wrote, and I am tired of living in a story that other people wrote about me. I imagine you might understand that feeling. A pause, and then something that our source says stopped the person witnessing it completely still. Camilla, I understand that feeling better than almost anything else in my life. The conversation continued from there. Our source does not have the full content of everything that was said. What they have is what the witness described afterward. Two women talking, not performing for anyone, not managing an interaction for an audience, just talking about what it is like to be defined by a story you did not write, about what it costs to persist in the face of public hostility, about the specific loneliness of being in a family that is also an institution and discovering that the institution's needs and your own needs are not always compatible, about what endurance actually looks like from the inside as opposed to how it looks from the outside, where it can be mistaken for coldness or calculation or simply not caring. Our source says the conversation lasted approximately 20 minutes. Not long in the context of two women who have been positioned as adversaries for years. Long in the context of what was actually being said and what was being acknowledged between them for the first time. When Harry returned to that part of the house, the conversation had ended. Both women were composed. Nothing visible had changed in the managed surface of the day. But our source says the person who witnessed that corridor exchange watched Camilla for the rest of that Highgrove visit and described something different in how she moved through the rest of the afternoon, something slightly less managed, something that looked like a person who had put down a weight they had been carrying so long they had forgotten what it felt like to not carry it. Whether this becomes anything more than one unexpected conversation in a corridor is something nobody knows. The history between these two women is real. The damage from Spare is real. The institutional distance that has always characterized their relationship is real. None of that disappears in 20 minutes. But our source says something happened in that corridor that has not happened in the entire history of their connection. Two women looked at each other without the story between them, without the narrative that other people wrote, without Harry and without Charles, and without the institution standing in the space between them. And what they found when all of that was removed was not what either of them expected. They found someone who understood something real about what the other person had been through. Not everything, not in the specific intimate way of people who have actually been close, but something. The specific something that only comes from having been the woman who was not supposed to win and winning anyway. The specific something that comes from enduring public hostility in the service of a private truth that you refuse to abandon. The specific something that comes from being defined by a story you did not write and choosing to write a different one anyway. That something passed between them in a corridor at Highgrove on an ordinary afternoon when nobody was supposed to be watching, and our source says the person who witnessed it has not stopped thinking about it since, because it was the most human thing they had seen in that building in a very long time. Two women, briefly, without the story, just the truth underneath it, and the particular quiet that happens when two people recognize something real in each other that they did not expect to find. That is all for tonight, friends. I am James, and this has been Royal Daily Report. If this story moved you tonight, hit that like button right now, subscribe if you have not already, and turn on those notifications, because we are here every single week with the stories that go deeper than any headline. Share this tonight with someone who knows what it means to be defined by a story you did not write, and who is still in the process of writing a different one. I will see you in the next one. Until then, stay informed, stay curious, and stay royal. Goodbye, friends.